Alright, so I've been meaning to cover this story for a while now. I just haven't got around to doing it. But on September 3rd, we got a story in the media about this boy, Jacob Wetterling, who the remains of his body were found in Minnesota. They actually found them on September 1st, 9/1, but they didn't know that it was his until 9/3 supposedly. So if you've been following my recent videos, I've talked about a lot of how these media stories have all been intertwined. Talked about Colin Kaepernick, I talked about Dwayne Wade's cousin, the death of Nebraska Cornhuskers punter Sam Foltz, also Teddy Bridgewater. And I mean, think about Teddy Bridgewater in regards to this boy being found in Minnesota. The death of Prince earlier this year had a whole lot of stuff as well. Prince from Minnesota. Anyway, what I'm going to show in here is how the Freemasons and people alike, they code these news stories. They plan everything to come out on certain times. They code them with gematria, which is they code numbers into the words and phrases. Literally everything on the media is always coded with this. It's like a secret language that the average person isn't supposed to know about. So anyway, the first thing that stood out to me in this story, and I've been covering the death of Sam Foltz and talking about the Nebraska Cornhuskers, the picture they give us of the kid, possibly nothing, but he's wearing a red shirt, just reminds me a lot of the Nebraska Cornhuskers. This kid's mom was a big part of the story as well. She's even from Omaha, Nebraska. I know that's not Lincoln, but it's still Omaha, Lincoln. That's pretty much all you think about when you think of Nebraska. But Omaha does have the connection to Lincoln University through UNO. Anyway, they report that this kid was found 27 years after his abduction, and Sam Foltz wore the number 27. I talked about last year when Dwayne Wade went to the game, Sam Foltz got hurt. It was Sam Foltz's 27th game, and then he came back against Miami. A whole bunch of other connections to that, Teddy Bridgewater from Miami. Just see the previous videos that I'm going to leave in the description. A lot of information. Anyway, CNN also does this a lot of times. They make the video and their story fit with whatever the agenda is. This video, 53 seconds. If you write out the word Nebraska, Nebraska equals 53. I don't think it's an accident. Also, if you write out the word 27, it equals 172, which if you do that as a date, 17/2, February 17th, there's a lot of stuff that's been pointing to that date in regards to the NBA. They even moved the NBA All-Star Week from Charlotte to wherever it was, I think New Orleans now. And they announced that they were going to do that on July 21st, 21/7. The All-Star Week begins on 2/17 or 17/2, February 17th, which is also Michael Jordan's birthday. And Michael Jordan just super connected to all of this. Sam Foltz even died on the 23rd anniversary of Michael Jordan's dad dying. Think about Michael Jordan in regards to number 23. Michael Jordan is also 53 years old right now, just like the word Nebraska. This kid was even kidnapped at the age of 11. 11 equals 27 when you write it out. Interesting, too, that I stopped it at 27 seconds. Did not mean to do that. So then they also said that the Ramsey County medical examiner was the one who identified the remains. And I've been talking about this Ram connection because Teddy Bridgewater last year, he got injured against the Rams the same weekend that Nebraska upset Michigan State. And of course, Mike Sadler also died in that car wreck with Sam Foltz, the Michigan State punter. Nebraska, Michigan State. Then Teddy Bridgewater gets hurt against the Rams. This year, Teddy Bridgewater gets a season-ending injury just before playing the Rams. And the Rams are significant because Nebraska is super connected to Moses from the Bible. They play in the Sea of Red. Nebraska equals 71 the big way. Moses equals 71. The word punt equals 71. The Ten Commandments equals 71. Nebraska played their bowl game last year in Levi's Stadium. Moses was in the tribe of Levi. Think about Colin Kaepernick in regards to Levi's stadium. And also think about Moses and the ram, Aries, the ram. So just interesting, it was Ramsey County. If you write out Ramsey County, it equals 53, just like Nebraska. It also says that he was kidnapped in St. Joseph, Minnesota. There's more to this as well, but St. Joseph, Minnesota and gematria equals 222. If you write out Nebraska Cornhuskers, it equals 222. The reason I mentioned St. Joseph, Minnesota is we got a story in Michigan, in St. Joseph, Michigan, about the bailiffs getting shot, and that all ties into the racial division, the civil rights kind of stuff that has been going on, and what I've been talking about in all of these interrelated stories. But I'll come back to that. CNN also gave us this side video that was 2 minutes, 22 seconds long. You know, he was kidnapped in St. Joseph, Minnesota. Nebraska Cornhuskers equal 222. He was kidnapped on a date that had a date numerology of 140, and then they found his remains in the town Painesville. Painesville equals 140. I've been seeing this number a lot in regards to the race stuff as well, especially connected to Louisiana. Their governor's name equals 140. I'm not so sure of the significance of 140, but I know in numerology you don't use the 0, so it would be a lot like a 14. If you write out 14, it equals 41. And I've talked a lot about Nebraska in regards to 41. Black shirts equals 41. They play in Memorial Stadium. Memorial equals 41. Husker fans equals 41. Red Inn equals 41. Anyway, the date numerology of the day that he was kidnapped is also can be 121. If you don't use the 19 in there, 10, 22, 89, you add it up, 121. Teddy Bridgewater's real name equals 121 in gematria. Sam Foltz was born on January 21st. The word revelation also equals 121. And it seems that a lot of this coding goes back to revelation in the Bible. They also reported that it's been 27 years, but it actually has only been 26 years. The 27th anniversary will be on October 22nd. And if you go from the day they found his remains to the 27th anniversary, it's a span of 1 month, 21 days. Also notice 51 days. This year we have Super Bowl 51 in Houston. Houston equals 112 in gematria. Sam Foltz equals 112 in gematria. Sam Foltz died 1 month, 12 days before Nebraska's first football game. A lot of 112 going around. You know, we even have the 112th World Series coming up. Anyway, the kid was also born in 1978. If you write out Nebraska Cornhuskers the small way, they equal 78. The guy who, at the time that I wrote this post, they didn't know for sure if it was him who killed him. They made a follow-up story and they said it was. So this is the guy who killed him, Danny Heinrich. He also equals 78. The kid was born in 78. Nebraska Cornhuskers equals 78. He's also 53 years old. I wrote most likely, but in the news story they say that he's 53 years old. Nebraska equals 53. You know, I never point out either. The football has the 53-man roster even. So his mom played a big part in the story. After he died or went missing, she was a big advocate for missing children and whatnot. Notice that she's from Omaha, Nebraska, like I said, but also born on November 2nd, 11/2, a lot like 112. Sam Foltz, 112, like I said. They also discovered the remains on September 1st, 9/1. You know, if you write out Vikings who play in Minnesota, Vikings equal 91. Think about Teddy Bridgewater. And there's some interesting connections in regards to 91 and 121. If you write out the word 91, it even equals 121. But if you go from January 21st and you go to the day that this kid was kidnapped, it was a span of 9 months, 1 day. How interesting. You know, Sam Foltz was also born on 121, like I said. Not in 1989, but 1994. If you go from the day that he was kidnapped to January 21st the next year in 1990, a span of 91 days. So 121, 91 have this interrelated connection. His mom's name, too, in Gematria equals 71, just like Nebraska the big way. Their last name, Wetterling, 133 and 52. Cornhuskers equals 52. If you notice in their last game, they even scored 52 points. There was a whole bunch of 52 references in that game as well. For example, number 17 on Wyoming. Once Wyoming had 17 points, they couldn't do anything anymore, if you noticed. And number 17 threw, 5 interceptions in the fourth quarter? And they even mention when they say it, they're like, that's 5 interceptions, 2 by this guy, and that's just the type of stuff that always happens in the games. And it might not have been 5 in the fourth quarter, it might have just been 5 the whole game, but in the fourth quarter he threw the majority of them. I can't remember, I'd have to go back and look. If I get time, I'll go back and make a video on that to clarify, but I know there's a lot of stuff in regards to 17 and the 5-2 reference. Anyway, in regards to the Vikings, I also want to point out that one of the pictures of this kid's family, the dad's wearing the Vikings hat. He's from Minnesota, so obviously, but just wanted to point it out, most likely a Vikings fan. The exact day that this kid was kidnapped in 1989, the Vikings just so happened to lose they won. Also in regards to 52, the exact day that this kid was kidnapped in 1989, the Vikings beat the Detroit Lions, and it made their record 5-2. And notice the score here, 20-7, a total score of 27. Now we're getting the story 27 years later. Also, how interesting, Detroit in Gematria, Detroit equals 91, Vikings equal 91. Think about all the other 91 I showed earlier. Another thing I want to point out is that Super Bowl 51 is going to be in Houston this year, and the first game of the season, in 1989, the Vikings played the Houston Oilers and won 38-7. And what sticks out about it is that Houston equals 112. September 10th is the day that leaves 112 days until the end of the year. And, of course, they had 38 points. If you write out Minnesota, it equals 38. Houston lost with 7 points. If you write out the word 7, 7 equals 38. And look at the score the very next week. They lost to the Bears 7-38. So 38-7, and the next week they lose 7-38. Just some things to think about. The word prophecy equals 52, but also Minnesota is hosting Super Bowl 52 in 2018. So possibly something for that. Another interesting thing in the story is the quarterback in 1989, or the starting quarterback, was Wade Wilson. And he wore the number 11. The kid that got kidnapped was 11 years old. It also just makes me wonder his name, Wade Wilson. I talked a lot about the movie Deadpool coming out around the Super Bowl. They even had the X Gonna Give It To You for the theme song on the trailer. I talked about how the Super Bowl was super connected to the 85 Bears who won Super Bowl XX. There was all kinds of X symbolism, the Black Panther stuff. Think of Malcolm X. The Broncos won with 24 points. X is the 24th letter. The Panthers had 10 points. X in Roman numerals is a 10. There was just lots of X symbolism going on then. Even the TV show X-Files made a comeback, and it came back on January 24th, the 24th day of the year. So just interesting that his name was Wade Wilson, just like the guy on Deadpool. And I've mentioned the death of Gene Wilder and how it connects to Van Wilder, who was played by Ryan Reynolds, who was also Deadpool, and some other stuff with that. Ryan Reynolds in Gematria equals 71, like Nebraska, like Moses as well. So in regards to the quarterback, Wade Wilson, notice too, he started all of these games, and then he didn't start the game where the kid was supposedly kidnapped. So he started 1, 2, 3, 4 games, then doesn't start this game, number 11, the same day the 11-year-old Jacob Wetterling gets kidnapped. Then, I didn't put a picture in here, but the next game that he starts is against, of course, the Rams. His full name in gematria, Charles Wade Wilson, equals 191. There's other interesting things with 191. The Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, equals 191. But also, just think about it, 191, it's a lot like 91 both ways, you know? His last season was also in 1991 for the Vikings. And also, the Minnesota Twins won in 1991. The reason I mention that, all the 91 stuff reminds me of Chicago Cubs. Chicago Cubs equals 91 in gematria. There's been lots and lots of stuff foreshadowing the Cubs to be in the World Series. Even this kid was originally from St. Joseph, Minnesota, and we got this story right here. On July 11th, which can be written 7/11 or also 11/7, and I've talked a lot about how the number 117 has been super significant in regards to a lot of this. Anyway, on that day, we got these bailiffs shot at the Michigan courthouse in St. Joseph, Michigan. And Michigan is just super ripe for all these civil rights coding. Michigan in gematria equals 64 and 46. Courthouse equals 46. Bailiffs equals the same as Michigan. You know, civil rights equals 64. The Civil Rights Act passed in 1964. Lyndon B. Johnson equals 64. He was the president then. He even died at the age of 64. A whole bunch more to that, but in regards to Lyndon B. Johnson and the connection to Houston that equals 112, Lyndon B. Johnson Space Center is in Houston. You know, also Barack Hussein Obama equals 64 in gematria. Also, Joe Biden equals 64 in gematria. So how fitting we get all of this racial stuff and racial division stories in the news when they're in office. Another thing that's interesting about the St. Joseph, Michigan, is that and when you look up the history, it even talks about how it is one of the twin cities. It's locally known, St. Joseph and Benton Harbor are locally known as the Twin Cities, which also reminds us of Minnesota. It even talks about how originally it was inhabited by the Miami and the Potawatomi Indians. Talked about how it's super connected to Miami as well. Dwayne Wade from Miami. Teddy Bridgewater from Miami. He got knocked out by LaMarcus Joyner last year, who is from Miami. A lot of it goes back to the 1971 National Championship where Nebraska beat LSU. Anyway, one other thing in regards to St. Joseph, and the reason I brought the Cubs back up is because if you look up, you know, St. Joseph, supposedly, according to whatever the apocryphal date here, it says he was born in 90 BC and also died in the year 1880, which this says age 72, but that doesn't make any sense. It would be 90 plus 18, which would be 108. And we've talked about the Cubs haven't won in 108 seasons. There's 108 double stitches on the baseball. The Willis Tower in Chicago is 108 stories tall. The Great Chicago Fire began in the year 1871 on October 8th, 10/8, which will be 145 years ago. If you write out 145, it equals 108. If you write out Chicago, Illinois, it equals 145. So, you know, lots of 108 around the Cubs, and then they're connected to the 91 through the Vikings. And also, on this day, right, the Vikings beat Detroit. If I can find it again. The Vikings beat Detroit that same day that that kid was kidnapped. The Vikings also beat Detroit earlier that year on 10/8. Detroit is the team who the Chicago Cubs were playing in 1945 when they got cursed by the Billy Goat. So who knows? Just something interesting. I really feel like the 91 is connected back to the Cubs. And all of these stories have been just super interrelated. In regards to the Michigan shooting story also, if you go from the day of this story to the day they found the kids' remains, a span of 1 month, 21 days. Oh, also one last thing I forgot to point out. St. Joseph equals 112 in Gematria, like Sam Foltz, like Houston. We're going into the 112th World Series. You know, I can't help but think of Back to the Future as well because they're super connected to the Cubs, even though 2015 is over. I've talked about how it's still connected to that. And this boy being kidnapped on October 22nd, it reminds me of the day in the movie that Marty McFly's son gets arrested for burglary and all of that. So, you know, he goes there to stop what's going to happen on October 22nd. So interesting for that. Also on this Back to the Future wiki thing, it says that it happened at 1:38 in the morning, which is super interesting. I'm not sure if that's a bank or whatever. It says it's the Hill Valley payroll substation. But it's just interesting because remember Brexit happened 138 days before the United States election. Donald Trump equals 138 in Gematria. I've mentioned a whole lot of 138, just tons of stuff, even in regards to Jimmy Carter, who I just made a previous video about. He was connected to the beauty pageant where Steve Harvey messed up and whatnot. And there was all kinds of stuff, but connected to 138, beauty pageant equals 138. They've even been showing me the Sioux Falls connection again. Sioux Falls equals 138. Paris attacks. I mean, just lots of interesting 138 stuff. So interesting that it was at that time. But also, in regards to Back to the Future on October 22nd, that was the day that Christopher Lloyd was born as well. In the year 1938, Minnesota equals 38. Look where he's from, though. Stamford, Connecticut. That is where Gene Wilder died. Gene Wilder died listening to Somewhere Over the Rainbow sung by one of his favorite artists, Ella Fitzgerald. Ella Fitzgerald equals 138. I also talked about how Jackie Robinson was in the connection. Jackie Robinson from Stamford, Connecticut. His middle name, Roosevelt. Talked about how Teddy Bridgewater and Teddy Roosevelt are connected to the Alton Sterling, Philando Castile stories. So, I mean, lots of stuff. I'll leave a playlist in the description you can check out so you can backtrack and figure out what I'm talking about and a lot of things that I didn't re-explain. One last thing about Back to the Future 2, and the reason it's so significant is this movie came out in 1989. It came out on November 22nd of 1989. You know, that was the anniversary of JFK being shot. But also, this movie is 108 minutes long. Just think about that in regards to the Chicago Cubs and how the Chicago Cubs are supposed to win. Also, one last thing. Back to the Future 3, then, I've talked about how a lot of it is connected to Prince Charles and all of the train symbolism. Train number 131 gets pushed back. Or train 131 is what pushes the DeLorean back. And then, of course, the train comes back and destroys the DeLorean. If you read out Prince Charles, it equals 131. It was 131 years ago that they go back to, 1885. 131 years ago. This movie came out on the 145th day of the year. Remember, 145 equals 108. Chicago, Illinois equals 145. The Cubs in their 145th season. So, you know, you get the point. Gonna end it there. Have a good one.